Hi, my name is Mandy Lynch, and I am presenting my Master's Dissertation Research Project as part of the MSc Integrative Counselling course at Bangor University. My decision to choose this topic was because I had clients and friends who had experienced acquired brain injuries, and through listening to them, I started to hear and see patterns in relation to emotional wounding they had received from negative childhood trauma. Therefore, I started to become curious and needed to find out whether there was a link between experiencing a negative childhood trauma and then experiencing an acquired brain injury later in life as an adult, looking at how their acquired brain injury was managed, how it has affected their current well-being, whether they would attend counselling if it was offered, and when and what type of counselling could be offered. As you can see here, an acquired brain injury is seen as a condition that happens after birth through internal factors. There are over 1.4 million people that present at hospital with brain injuries every year. Betsy Cadwallader reported over 1,000 stroke patients were admitted last year. Headway reported that there had been a 10% increase in strokes over the last 15 years. A Lancashire hospital reports double the amount of women and over 65 suffering from brain injuries. Adults who suffered from physical, sexual abuse, emotional neglect and wounded had greater odds of reporting an acquired brain injury. Negative childhood traumas, otherwise known as adverse childhood experiences, which was developed by the original CDC cases study in the late 1990s. These ACEs are emotional wounding. ACEs cause lost connections with future health and well-being. ACEs affect the developing brain, the endocrine and immune systems. It is caused by toxic stress causing harmful health behaviours which go on to develop diseases in the body. A Welsh ACE survey suggested the more ACEs experienced as a child, the more long-term health consequences the adult self has. Before experiencing an ABI or an acquired brain injury or losing connections, O'Donnell suggested that there were risk factors such as toxic stress that are responsible for 90% of all strokes. Quinn also suggested that risk behaviours such as heart disease or compulsive eating correlate with the risk factors, with the likelihood of experiencing an ABI later in life. Therefore, my research asks, how does negative childhood traumas have an impact on the experience of an acquired brain injury in later life? We'll speak about the hypothesis 1. Participants who report higher levels of childhood trauma will indicate more recurrence of brain injuries, greater impact of brain injury on day-to-day life, poorer current management of day-to-day life, and lower current well-being. By asking this question, it will hopefully help us to see whether there is a link between negative childhood traumas and acquired brain injuries, to look at what support is required and help healthcare professionals to create suitable counselling and emotional support services for those that have been affected by emotional wounding in childhood, in order to either prevent future acquired brain injuries or to provide services afterwards to help patients' clients to manage their ABI. Three researchers collaborated as a group to collect the data for this study. However, the dissertation project was completed individually. All participants were over 18 and had a brain injury and were recruited for 2 stages. Participants were recruited through emails, stroke association, via social media, websites, Facebook and Twitter. As you can see, stage 1 consisted of questionnaires which were presented through the Qualtrics and included things like demographics, mental health support questions, and 2 long questionnaires on childhood experiences and well-being questions. The second stage contained a novel set of interview prompts, which we created ourselves, containing 7 open-ended questions. We adhered to the BACP and BPS guidelines for ethical research, and it was approved through Bangor University's Research Ethics Committee. There were 13 participants who completed the Stage 1 questionnaires. We had 3 participants complete the Stage 2 interviews. The youngest participant was aged 23 and the oldest was 75. As you can see from these 2 charts, the genders were, there was more females, 69.2%, females, and the majority of the people lived in England with 61.5%. The results from the adult life before acquired brain injury. The limitation of the study meant that only stage 2 participants answered this against the question, I am interested in your life before your brain injury. As you can see, all 3 participants said they had worked before their brain injury. The results for the childhood experiences. Here we see a copy of the actual questionnaire that was filled out. They were headed originally, none of the time, rarely, some of the time, often, and all of the time. These headings were given as childhood score of 1 to 4 to help with data processing. The graph on show shows the childhood experiences and age. I've highlighted 3 particular participants. We have participant 8, who's age 44, has the highest of the childhood experiences score of 73, as he checked most of the questions from rarely to all of the time from stage 1, including a parent caregiver did not show me any emotion, I was criticised as a child, and so forth. Participant 4 was aged 31, scored 49 and checked answers such as a parent caregiver did not show me any emotion, I was criticised as a child I wasn't given enough nurturing. Participant 12, aged 63, has the lowest of the childhood experiences scores of 0 because they checked all of the questions with none of the time. Participant 12 actually filled out another question through stage 2. Please can you tell me a little bit about your childhood? As you can see from her answer, she did say that I didn't have a traumatic experience in my childhood. I think heavily idyllic childhood actually. She went on then to say that towards the end that she was having some doubts, so they were keen that we have opportunities, and yeah, my childhood looking back was just there was some silence, idyllic. I can't remember anything traumatic ever happening. I don't know. Also from stage 1, the participant 12 checked boxes for none of the time to every question on the childhood experiences questionnaire, including my parents, caregivers, worried about money. This would suggest that they have not experienced any negative childhood traumas, emotional wounding in their environments whilst growing up, perhaps because it was idyllic, or perhaps they can't remember because of their injury, or they're in denial of what happened to them in childhood, as they were questioning it during the answer. We have highlighted participant 6 because she also filled in stage 2 question. Please can you tell me a little bit about your childhood? As you can see, she answered, I have very little recollection of my childhood. Also from stage 1, participant 6 checked boxes for my parents' caregivers worried about money. My parents' caregivers had arguments. Suggests that there had been some negative childhood trauma, and perhaps they had either suppressed their trauma into their subconscious, or they may not be consciously aware due to their brain injury. Again, with childhood experiences, stage 2, we had participant 10 give us an answer, say that, not that I can recall, I've got a couple of parents who were very loving and very caring. In fact, this was the shortest answer that she actually gave within the whole recording. She also, from stage 1 participant, had checked boxes for rarely to these. A parent caregiver did not show me any emotion. As a child, I was hit or physically abused. As a child, what was strange was that she didn't click on none of the time to suggest that actually she did experience many negative childhood traumas, emotional wounding in their environments whilst growing up. Therefore, as you can see, childhood experiences, the most highlighted and checked answers were 85% of all participants said that my parents' caregivers worried about money, 85% had arguments, 69% were criticised as a child, 62% I had a parent caregiver that did not show them any emotion, and 54% of all participants said that I witnessed violence as a child. These all show emotional wounding of the inner child. 92.3% of all participants have had negative childhood experiences within this study. Results for acquired brain injuries. We had 46% had experienced a stroke as their ABI. 30.8% had experienced trauma head injury as an IABI. Almost all, the 92.3% of participants, have said they had not been diagnosed with a mental health condition, although one had been diagnosed with depression. 61.5% of participants said they had diagnosed disability due to the ABI. And as you can see, there's a list of others there on why they were diagnosed for their disability. Within stage 2, participants also answered the questions, please can you tell me about your brain injury? And all 3 participants, 6, 10 and 12, all had strokes. The impact of managing brain injury, as you can see from here, 61.6% of all participants said that their brain injury had severely and negatively impacted on their day-to-day life when it happened. However, 84.7% of all participants said that currently they are positively managing their brain injury in their day-to-day life. There was mixed results for the impact of managing brain injury for stage 2 participants. Participant 6 said it was a personal growth program for her. Participant 10 said it was more difficult for her to do things, but she did go and practice along the way to get things done. And participant 12 had actually said they retired from work, and this was a major impact on her life, and she lost confidence. Stage 2 participants also answered another question. What do you think has been the most challenging part of living with a brain injury? And participant 6 said it was to do with how stressed she was and the workload. Participant 10 was about challenging that people don't understand actually what they're going through because they look fine and they don't think they've got a problem. Participant 12 said it was the emotional side, the psychological side of it, in fact, that was worse for her than the physical side. It was the bursting into tears. As we can see here, it's the wellbeing questionnaire. It consisted of 14 sub-questions, which were headed none of the time, rarely, some of the time, often, and all of the time. These headings were given childhood scores from 1 to 5, with wellbeing scores being between 45 and 56. Participants filled in the wellbeing questionnaire. As you can see from here, 61.6% of all participants have felt positive within the last 2 weeks of completing the wellbeing questionnaire. However, there were many other percentages of where they were not feeling confidence, they didn't have the energy to spare, they weren't interested in other people, they weren't close to people, and they weren't feeling very cheerful. As we can see from this slide, around counselling, 84.6% of participants said they were not offered counselling after their brain injury. 69.2% said they felt an offer of counselling would have been helpful. And only 7% of the participants accessed counselling support independently. As you can see from stage 2 participants who were asked the same question about emotional support, participant 6 said they didn't really have much. They did from the North Wales Brain Injury Service and also from the university. There were huge support. Participant 10 said that somebody had rang, but that was about all. Participant 12 said they didn't want to access support. They were in complete denial of having a stroke. As we can see from here, what counselling should be offered, all participants were asked. They were saying things like there is a need for counselling with emotional support, more emotional support, total support, being around people who understand, emotional support. Emotional support seemed to be the big one that they were asking for. Again, stage 2 participants were asked the same question, but obviously through their stage 2, they were pretty much saying the same thing. They wanted support, holistic approach, wanted somebody to sit down with them and talk it through, and perhaps hold them and just let them know what's happening for them, and having a talking therapy of some sort. Therefore, what you can see from the results from our research question is how does negative childhood traumas have an impact on the experience of an acquired brain injury in later life. Participants who reported high levels of childhood trauma will indicate more reoccurrence of brain injuries. More research really needs to be done on the direct link between ABI and negative childhood experiences in a child emotional wounding. However, this study suggests that 92.3% of all participants experiencing negative childhood experience. Greater impact of the brain injury on day-to-day life, while 61.6% of all participants said that their brain injury had severely and negatively impacted on their day-to-day life when it happened. Whether it indicated a poorer current management of day-to-day life, the study has shown that it did not indicate poorer current management of, as 84.7% of all participants said that currently they are positively managing their brain injury in their day-to-day life. However, they were only managing positively sometimes. And finally, lower current well-being. The study has shown that it didn't lower current well-being, although more research would need to be done to clarify if participants are using or continuing to use risk behaviour coping strategies to cope with their current well-being. As you can see from the discussion and limitations to this study, there was a lot of questions to fill in, and with someone with an acquired brain injury, this may have hindered some of them to complete them, hence the low numbers. The answers to the interview questions are being seen from the participants and researchers' own perspectives and biases, therefore they are open to much more interpretation, which may or may not be correct. Participants may have wanted to protect themselves from further distress, especially with the delicate nature of some of the childhood experiences. Questions being asked, which would have stimulated their memory to discover what had happened to them that wounded them emotionally. Participants may not have wanted to answer the childhood experiences questions in relation to not wanting to blame their parents, caregivers for emotionally wounding them, and may have therefore wanted to protect the memories of them as not to judge them or make themselves feel guilty doing so. Other limitations where participants may not be aware that they have any negative childhood traumas because their defence mechanisms are coming into play to protect them, or it may be that by experiencing the negative childhood experiences, their brain, when developing as a child, started to unwire itself and lost connections as a way of adapting their brain to cope in a negative or abusive home situation. The individual could simply not have had any negative childhood traumas and could have experienced an acquired brain injury through other related medical issues. It would have been helpful to have included questions around work and life stresses and how the participants connected with others in the adult life before they had their acquired brain injury to help with getting some context, because limiting the study with set questions within stage 2 did not allow for additional questions to be asked in order to explain with the participant. This was, for example, with the childhood questions. So another limitation would be knowing the backstory to what had caused the brain injury for the participant. For example, participant 7 stated they had experienced a hypoxic and anoxic brain injury, which was not a stroke. Hypoxic brain injuries are a lack of oxygen to the brain for at least 4 minutes, which should be caused through a stroke, cardiac arrest, low blood pressure, near drowning, carbon monoxide poisoning, choking, or drug overdose. This participant had also been emotionally wounded by many negative childhood traumas, as you can see below. This may have given an indication that participant 7 could have been using health risk behaviours, using drugs, drinking, etc. to emotionally self-regulate themselves. They could have tried to commit suicide by ligature trauma, their brain development had been affected during their childhood, or they could simply have just had an accident or been saved from drowning from the ABI to happen. From a metaphysical anatomy perspective, emotions for hypoxia in the body says you seem to feel as if you do not have enough of everything that you need in life. You may feel a lack of nurturing protection, and we'd seen that from the questions that he'd answered before. This participant is a male, was age 19 at the time of the ABI, is now 23, and said he only rarely dealing with problems well, only sometimes feeling close to other people, although at the same time he has been feeling loved recently as a student. Emotional neglect and wounding is an important factor to consider when trying to look at developing new counselling and wellbeing strategies for anyone that is presenting with health risk factors. In conclusion, negative childhood experiences have had an impact on the participants which may have contributed to their acquired brain injury, although extra research would need to be carried out with case studies to be able to ask and explore with open-ended questions. 85% of participants confirmed that they either found or would have found counselling helpful to be able to provide them with emotional support, financial support, and a way of being able to talk through what changes are going on for them. By providing counselling with emotional support or inner child work could be done to help individuals to reparent themselves, nurture and reconnect themselves with their emotions, to look to rewire those lost childhood connections from childhood traumas in order to prevent the likelihood of experiencing an acquired brain injury later on in life. To help to bring down the stress levels in those that excessively engage in adult health risk, taking behaviours that include working long hours, trying to please everybody, compulsively eating, and all of those that are used as coping mechanisms for an individual to cope and self-regulate themselves, which can correlate with unresolved adverse childhood experience. A suggestion to look at the mind and body connection through theories like metaphysical anatomy, to look at patterns, how emotional wounding is and has affected the body. Therefore, my take-home message to you today: prevention or counselling of negative childhood experiences, inner child emotional wounding, may reduce the occurrence of an acquired brain injury. However, additional research is required to explain the potential routes for emotional wounding to ABI and vice versa. I would like to thank you for listening to me today, and please leave your questions in the comments section below. If you would like more information or copies of these slides, then please, if you want to leave a message down below, that's great. Thanks ever so much. Bye.